No sport in the world is more unpredictable than MMA, and sometimes a fighter can't even make it to the cage. From last-minute injuries to strategic ploys for success, let's look at some of the most significant pullouts in UFC history. The cursed Tony vs. Khabib matchup. To date, this is one of the most bizarre rivalries that exist in the sport, because the fight was scheduled 5 times before the promotion called it quits. The sustained attempts at having the fighters meet were meant to have two of the most dominant guys in the division face off, and the first time they were booked was back in 2015 in the finale of the Ultimate Fighter's 22nd season, and at the time Khabib backed out because of a rib injury. The Dagestani was forced to pull out of several fights for recurring knee injuries and dehydration problems. It got so bad that Khabib was losing credibility as a contender. However, the following year it was Tony who had to pull out from their rescheduled bout because he didn't get a doctor's clearance. In a ping-pong of health-related issues, when the pair signed the contracts for a third time for UFC 209, Nurmagomedov was hospitalized with weight cut related issues just days before the fight. By this time, both fighters had massively built up their resume, and not being able to fight was causing major problems at the top of the division. The fifth and final attempt at having the Titans clash got as close as a face-off before the pandemic hit, and Khabib was stuck in Russia. Ferguson decided to fight Justin Gaethje for the interim title, and got beat down in spectacular fashion, taking away his right to challenge Khabib for the belt. Khabib retired after his third defense, and he cracked the nutrition code for 155 by the time he reached the top. But another Russian has proven problematic on the scale and pulled out of high-profile fights. Khamzat Chimaev walked away from the biggest fight of his career. Time and again, we've seen a young contender matched up with an older superstar. It's a classic way of testing a new fighter and keeping the old ones relevant. Khamzat Chimaev got his opportunity to kill a legend when he signed on to fight Nate Diaz at UFC 279. Boers was an overwhelming favorite, and nobody really expected any kind of fight from Diaz. In fact, many thought it was a cheap shot from the UFC to give Nate an impossible opponent for his last fight in the promotion, until Boers missed weight, that too by around 7 pounds, and the doctors refused to let him continue dehydrating himself because of the sheer amount left for him to lose. It's been said that Nate was offered an additional $2 million to fight Khamzat anyway, but the Stockton Slugger didn't want any of that smoke. The card was shuffled around. Boers fought Kevin Holland at middleweight and dismantled him within the opening minute, while Nate retired on a submission victory over Tony Ferguson. No matter how impressive Chimaev's performance was, his seriousness as a contender at welterweight was brought into question. He's massive at 170 pounds and may need to stop cutting weight so much. He may not make it half the time, and when he does, he'll be in trouble if the fight goes into deep waters. Nate Diaz has built a career over beating short-notice opponents, and the scalp of El Cucuy doesn't hold a candle to this next entry. RDA makes way for a historic rivalry. Conor McGregor's first bid at becoming a 2-division world champion came in 2016, when he moved up to 155 and challenged Rafael dos Anjos for his lightweight title. The fight was promoted heavily, and it was a historic moment. No fighter had ever seemed to have that good of a shot at becoming a double champ, and if Conor failed, it would be the first time we see the Irishman bested in the cage. The press conferences leading up to the fight were hilarious. Both fighters were in their prime, and it had all the clout to become a record-breaking fight. However, just 9 days before the two met inside the cage, RDA suffered an ankle injury during training and was forced to withdraw from what would have surely been his biggest payday to date. Like the superhero his fans believe him to be, the younger Diaz brother emerged from a yacht in Cabo and called Conor out to fight. What followed was a reinvention of short-notice fight promotion, and it completely changed the way fighters began approaching backup fights. We all know how that fight went. It made Diaz a superstar when he choked out Conor. And that storyline motivated an entire generation of fighters to be ready at all times and take whatever opportunity they can get in the sport. Dos Anjos never got the chance to fight Conor again, but he wasn't the first champion to pull out from a fight against the notorious one. Aldo tried to run, but could only hide for so long. The Brazilian legend Jose Aldo produced one of the most magical championship runs in the lighter weight classes, but he had a bit of of a reputation for being a flight risk. He's canceled numerous fights in his career, inducing his first ever title defense. And the same happened when he was scheduled to take on the Irishman. Aldo had been dismissing Conor as a serious contender until he was forced to acknowledge the Irishman, and the trash talking got white hot during the press tour leading up to the fight. In confirmation of everyone's worst fears, a few weeks prior to their fight, the champion canceled. Conor thinks Aldo got scared, while Aldo cited a rib injury. Once more, the UFC scrambled to find an opponent, and wrestling phenom Chad Mendes answered the call. In hindsight, the Mendes fight added to Conor's stock because of how tough the fight was and Conor's display of heart in the face of adversity. Not to mention the interim title it won him, followed closely by his infamous 13-second reunification of the belts once Aldo healed up and took the fight. McGregor embodied the anywhere, anytime mentality pretty well, but he was by no means its pioneer. Royce Gracie was the original badass, but even he had to pull out sometimes. In the times before Venom Shorts and ESPN networking, the UFC was a land of few rules and fewer heroes. In 1994, when the OG Gracie was representing the jiu-jitsu world in a cage where groin shots were tolerated, and there were no rounds or time limits, he was still undefeated at 7-0. What's more impressive is that Gracie would fight and beat several fighters in the same night to be crowned the Ultimate Fighter. There were no clothing requirements, no weight classes, no rounds or time limits. Fighters just went at it until one gave out. At both UFC 1 and 2, Gracie had been the last man standing. At UFC 3, Royce met another legend in the very first round of the tournament. The massive Kimo Leopoldo had over 100 pounds on the jiu-jitsu practitioner. He muscled Royce to the ground and used every bit of his energy to beat the snot out of Gracie for the entirety of the fight. Royce caught him with an armbar eventually and forced the tap, but the entire ordeal was so taxing that he just couldn't imagine fighting another time that night. It was the first time anybody had pulled out of a UFC fight, and it would also be the first time anybody but Gracie would win the one-night championship event. Fighters pulling out can be pretty disappointing for fans, but it can also lead to some unforgettable matchups. But that's all we've got for today. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.
Here we go! Spinning back kick immediately.
Flying knees. I mean, right off the bat. That's accuracy right there.
All right, gentlemen, we've been over the rules. Protect yourself at all times.
Working in the closed guard of McGregor. McGregor's talking to him.
Body shot. Conor was wobbled behind it, trying to hang in. The knee to the face. Up top.
I just thought it's another day. It's always happening. They always.
This. McGregor.
You can't just sit here and protect yourself because they will stop the fight. For an MMA, and Aldo is going to drop just about anybody.
Right hand there. Manny wobbled. There's the uppercut. Manny's hurt. Jose Aldo on his back. Unloading. Oh, hard uppercuts by Aldo. This is it.